were lucky and fortunate to have Admiral. Oh, see, you're live now. Look, there's no avoiding it. You all but you can get out of the virtual world. But I mean, being HQ'd in Cardiff Admiral, it was such an amazing company to get some sponsorship and backing by. So really, huge thanks to Luke and the team over at Admiral for sponsoring the group as well. And of course, NetApp. So for those who don't know Kirk, obviously some sponsorship towards the user group as well. And I think NetApp are doing a similar thing across a few user groups, aren't they, Kirk? So
just a few.
But no, I mean, it's fantastic at the end of the day. It gets us all out and kind of keeps them being out hopefully a bit more often and see how we go. But I think that's all we got. Let's stop my droning on. Let's get on with the actual stuff that we're here to see. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Mr. Reddington. And this is where audio goes crazy.
This is where
Are you following Teams, people?
Yeah.
hopefully Teams coming out with you. No. Apparently you should hear me by now.
You got a bit quiet.
Just a bit quiet. I can speak really loud if you like.
That's just about audible.
That's just about all.
Yeah.
For me to turn it.
Yeah, if you could.
I will do it that way, so that'll get set up. So, take over the screen share.
It's just a bit low volume. Audio is very thin. Just tap that mic. Yeah, I think that is that mic.
Hello, 1, 2, 2.
That's better.
That's better.
Yeah.
All good? Okay. I mean, before we start, I am going to have to do a quick selfie to go on Twitter, so everyone get your smiling faces out again.
Can you tag Wales as the best?
Right, good, so let's just check the art. There we go, good. So, thank you everyone for joining in person. It's really strange to actually see the people I'm presenting to, rather than feeling like I'm presenting back people in the virtual world. We're going to be talking all about Azure Arc, specifically for application services. I'll try to not stand in one of the screens, but this is really actually having to move on for it. So, we'll be talking about Azure Arc for application services. There we go. So my name is Chris Reddington. I think a few folks already know me. Good to see some old faces, some new faces, some faces I've only seen virtually. Really, really awesome. By day, I work for Microsoft, so we've got a few cloud solution architects in the room. I am another one as well. But in my spare time, I'm also a blogger, a podcaster, a content creator for Cloud with Chris. So cloudwithchris.com. Go and check it out, because I'd say I make some awesome content. You can be the judge of that. Also organise a meetup group as well, Azure Thames Valley. We're still virtual right now, so if you do want to join us in our stuff, you're very welcome. And I do some musical theatre as well, but I'm not going to do any of that today, because that's not what we're here for. Moving swiftly on. What I'd love to know, and maybe we'll start with the folks online first, just to make sure we're being inclusive, is love a quick poll just on your experience with Azure overall, application services, Kubernetes as well, and whether you've heard of Azure Arc. So folks online, if you just jump in the chat and we'll get someone maybe to call out some summary of what we're saying. For folks in the room, Azure Arc, comfortable, know it, familiar? A few-ish developers by background? Okay, we've got a few. Cool, this is going to be an interesting talk. Okay, and then Azure overall, like, happy with? Okay, cool. Got a good mix.
We have one, don't know one online.
Cool. So we've got a really interesting mix here. This will be fun and interesting. So the idea then behind this talk is we're going to look at Azure Arc very briefly at a high level. We're then going to look at some key concepts and key terms when it comes to Azure Arc for applications. So Azure Arc for apps is pretty new. So Microsoft Build back in May of this year is where it was announced in preview. So we're 6 months on, still in the preview stage. When we look at it, it hasn't really evolved so much in terms of the capability, but I think the idea and the potential of it is really exciting, which is why I wanted to talk about it here today. And particularly the fact that those application services can run on any Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster. So I know we are called the Welsh Azure user group, but that can run on a GCP cluster, that can run on a EKS cluster, that can run on Kubernetes in your on-premises environment as well by using Azure Arc, and that's what we're going to look at here this evening. So as a quick recap, Azure Arc, the idea behind it is we're in a world where a lot of us here are probably familiar with cloud or working with cloud, but not everyone is quite there yet. A lot of organizations still have states where maybe they're still running on premises, maybe we've got multi-cloud strategies as well. And let's face it, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a real world. So the idea behind Azure Arc is who wants to go ahead and manage 3 or 4 different environments that are not the same? Having to scale up on GCP, on AWS, on Azure, in your premises, and keeping all of those skills current across all of those environments. Not just keeping the skills current, how do you then manage all of those environments as well? Like, think about patching, think about configuration drift and all those things. It's hard enough in one environment, let alone across 3 or 4 different environments, right? So this is the promise and the idea behind Azure Arc, is this single pane of glass experience, this single control plane you can go and use. And I use that word control plane deliberately because what we're talking about with Azure Arc is it's all built on the same control plane that you're used to with Azure Resource Manager. So whenever you create resources in Azure, you create them through Azure Resource Manager. And that's exactly what's going on here with Azure Arc. Those objects, whether it's a virtual machine, whether it's a database, whether it's a Kubernetes cluster, is now basically just an object that you go and manage in Azure. And then, rather than using all those different tools, you go into Azure and go and manage it from there. So it's starting to bring that single pane of glass across all of those different environments there. So making it a lot easier to go and manage, a lot easier to go and maintain. So Azure Arc, even though this talk is about apps, it's not just about apps. So Azure Arc originally started focusing on virtual machines. So imagine those virtual machines that you have running in your on-premises data center. Think about inventory management, understanding what you've got installed on those machines. Patching, for example, keep all of that up to date, monitoring all of those machines. That's where it started. Then it built on to Azure Arc enabled data services with Kubernetes in the middle there, and we'll come back to that. But then also Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters. And that middle bit there, Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters, is the magic behind what we'll be talking about this evening here as well. So Kubernetes, I'm sure everyone will have heard of it, if not probably used it and think it's the best thing ever. We're going to move our entire estate onto Kubernetes because Kubernetes solves all the problems. No, it doesn't really. Okay. It's not the tool to solve them. But there are some great benefits that come with it. And that's partly what we'll explore with this talk here today. Now, the thing we'll focus in on in a moment is Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters. So Kubernetes, really, when you boil it down, is just an orchestrator for all your containers. So containers are a nice, easy way to deploy our applications. When you manage them at scale, you need something to go do that for you, because trying to keep all of those containers running, trying to keep them up, not dying, healthy, etc., is a lot of management. Wouldn't be great if we could have software to do that for us. That's what Kubernetes does. Now, the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes piece allows us to manage those clusters by using Azure Arc. So a bit like we mentioned earlier on with the virtual machines, the patching, the maintenance, etc. This idea of Azure Arc, now that we can go and apply that to Kubernetes clusters, whether it's on AWS, whether it's on Azure, GCP, on-premises, I'm going to keep repeating those points so that really goes in. You can now go and manage those from inside of Azure. So what does that mean in real terms from a Kubernetes perspective? Let's say that I want to restrict what containers can actually be run inside my Kubernetes cluster. You could go and do that by using policy. Azure policy to your Azure Arc enabled cluster. You could go and, for example, use GitOps to make sure you deploy your applications at scale across your Kubernetes clusters. Now that's all well and good, but it's all using just native containers. It's all using container images, etc., which is fine. But from a development standpoint, we prefer to have maybe a consistent application development approach. So Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes clusters is the first
step to us getting that overall story. So what we're going to do for a moment here is just jump across to a demo, and I've done this as a video deliberately because we're now actually in the real world. We can't rely on Wi-Fi and things, so I'm going to go ahead and run the video here. So what you're going to see on screen here over the next kind of 3 or 4 minutes is the fact that I've got a Kubernetes cluster set up in Azure already. Now this Kubernetes cluster is pretty much like the click, new, create experience. There's nothing special about that whatsoever. As you can see here, there's no pods or containers running on that cluster right now, apart from all of the basic system stuff that is running there. So what do we need to do at this stage? What do we actually go and set up from here? Well, if we go back into the Azure portal, when you go and search through your Azure resources, you can search for Azure Arc, and there is a resource called an Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster. So if we just pause there for a moment, before you set that up, there's a few prerequisites that you're going to have. A, you need a Kubernetes cluster, so that's kind of an important thing. Again, could be AKS, could be EKS, could be GKE, could be Kubernetes on premises. You need to have the Azure CLI installed on your machine. You need to have Helm installed on your machine for the packages and installing those as well. Then ultimately, when you run the commands that get output from the Azure portal, that's based upon the context inside of your environment at the time. So you can see all I'm doing right here is just going through an experience like I would create any other Azure resource. Selecting a region there, going ahead and running through and putting in my tags, etc. there. Then what will get output as a result is just an Azure CLI command. So the interesting thing about the way you connect these Kubernetes clusters to Azure Arc is you just use the Azure CLI. Now, when I run that command on my terminal, as you'll see in a moment, that command uses the context that I'm already executing in on my machine. So if I've got my machine configured to point to a certain Kubernetes cluster, it's going to set that Kubernetes cluster up and point that to Azure Arc. So one pro tip, before you run that command, make sure you're pointing at the right cluster. Don't point to the prod if you don't want prod to go there, etc., etc. Do your due diligence first. But what you'll see then is after a couple of minutes or so, I think I clipped the video just to, for the sake of speed. Cannot do the recording. Oh, I wasn't sure if that was me or a note to me or anything. I was like, have I done something wrong with my recording? Ah, okay, definitely not me. There we go. So after a few minutes, what you see then is the Kubernetes cluster now has an Azure Arc agent running on it. So what you'll see, very small font for folks in the room, I appreciate, but the cluster is now connected to Azure Arc. What that means is all of that goodness that we talked about earlier, the fact that I can go and start monitoring that cluster, the fact that I can go and start applying configuration to that cluster, I now have all of that at my fingertips from the Azure portal. Now you saw how easy that was, right? I just had to go and follow a resource creation like in the Azure portal. And there you can see all of the resources that are created as a result of that. So what we're just seeing here, for example, is how you can go ahead and enable GitOps configuration. So how you can go and deploy applications at scale to your Kubernetes cluster. There you can see, for example, the Azure policies, how you go and apply Azure policies across all of those clusters. And once again, I'm talking clusters generic, not AKS clusters. They could be Kubernetes clusters on-prem, GCP, AWS, Azure. We're all going to be chanting it together by the end of it. But the point here is Azure Arc is now that single control plane for us to start managing these things at scale, which is really, really awesome and an interesting idea. So that's all well and good. That's Kubernetes clusters. But I said I'm going to be doing a talk on applications specifically. And when we think about applications from an Azure perspective, we've got some really great services. We've got things like App Service, Azure Functions, Logic Apps, API Management, and Event Grid. Anyone here to those? Yep, good, good. A reassuring, probably 90% of the room, good. Use those. And online folks as well. Hopefully we're getting a bit of a delay. Cool, no worries. We'll see you in 5-10 seconds, maybe. 30, oh wow, okay. We'll maybe move along then. Those application services right now, when you think of them from a PaaS service perspective, they run in Azure. They exist in Azure. They exist in Azure regions. But wouldn't it be really interesting if my clicker worked? There we go. If you could go ahead and use something like Azure Arc to start installing those application services anywhere. So in your Kubernetes cluster on premises, in a Kubernetes cluster, in AWS, in GCP. So think about that, right? You're going to have Azure App Services, Azure Functions, Azure API Management, Azure Event Grid, and Azure Logic Apps running in Amazon Web Services, running in Google Cloud. This isn't like make-believe, or this isn't like me thinking of a pipe dream. This is real, this is possible, this is something you can do. And that is what we're going to be looking at now. So again, I have another video for us ready to go. So I'll do a bit of narration over the top again here. But actually, I think before that, I might just do a couple of quick concepts first before we jump in. The first concept is something called cluster extensions. So remember earlier, we've got this thing called an Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster. Everyone with me on that one so far? Cool, getting nods, that's reassuring. Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster, we set that up, awesome. One of the things we can now do on that cluster is install something called a cluster extension. And you have a few different cluster extensions. One called API Management Gateway, guess what that does? One called Application Services, one called the Azure Arc Data Controller, and then another Event Grid on Kubernetes extension. They're all fairly self-explanatory, I think, what they all are. Now, the idea is that these extensions are a bit like plugins or enhancements that you can add to your Kubernetes cluster. So you can now go and install app services on that Kubernetes cluster. You can install API management or those data services and then manage them from the Azure portal. But think about that for a moment, because when you go and, oops, click the wrong link. There you go. When you go and create an Azure resource, you have to go and select an Azure region to deploy that resource into. North Europe, West Europe, UK South, UK West, South Central US. I deploy my resources in an Azure region. But I want to deploy it into a Kubernetes cluster that is in GCP or AWS or on premises or Azure. Everyone's with me, everyone's giggling, good. There's this custom object, or not a custom object, it's a resource like any other resource in Azure called a custom location. And the idea is you define a custom location that maps back to that Kubernetes cluster. it maps back to a namespace in the cluster that you're deploying to. So when I go into the Azure portal and I select, right, I want to deploy to Chris's GCP cluster, Azure knows, okay, I know that's over here, so I'm going to route that resource request over here, and the Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster is going to deal with that request there on in. So it's a really interesting idea, because now you can take that love and magic and all of that thought that the Azure engineering teams have put together and use that in other clouds if you have a reason that you want to go and do that. Maybe multi-cloud strategies, for example, is a good one. So with those concepts out of the way, let's go ahead back to the recording. So as you can see here, what we're doing now is we're back in that Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster. And you can see we've got these 4 different options: API management, application services, Azure Arc data, and event grid. We're going to be setting up the application services one. So think about your app services, think about your Azure functions, think about your logic apps. When you run those in Azure, typically, it's either in something like an app services environment, which is like your own stamp of that, the whole infrastructure for that, or you deploy it into like a multi-tenant environment, which Azure runs, and you happen to be a customer running on that infrastructure. So what we're doing here is we're basically setting up our own stamp on a Kubernetes cluster. And that is the underlying infrastructure that will run our Azure app services. So you can see here, we're just going through some of the configuration. You've got to have, currently in its current form at least, you've got to have a public IP address static for this to work. It does say on there that this is probably going to change over time, but bear in mind it's currently a preview state. That's just currently how this works. You can set up your monitoring. You set up your custom location. You may have missed that on the previous screen there. But effectively, this is the underlying plumbing that's needed to create this extension. And all we're doing is saying, right, hey, Azure Arc for Kubernetes, this cluster is going to run this extension. It's going to be an app services extension. So treat this like an app services environment that I can go and deploy into. So what happens at the end of this little segment here is we get a whole load of PowerShell, I think it is, that's generated. Now, I'm personally an Azure CLI fan. So what I do on screen in a moment here is basically do the whole same thing using the Azure CLI. Again, not expecting anyone to read through all this and go, right, got that. But there's a few key steps here. Number one is you need to make sure that you have the relevant extensions needed in your local environment to run these commands. Number two, you need the resource providers to be registered on Azure. Once you've got that, just create an Azure Log Analytics, easy for you to say, Azure Log Analytics workspace created. And then what you can then do is start enabling this Kubernetes, app service Kubernetes extension then on your cluster. Now, to do that, there is a prerequisite. Remember that custom location thing that we talked about a moment ago? You need a custom location first before you can go and create that Kubernetes environment. So it looks like a lot. It's all really well documented, I promise you. It's not as scary as it looks flashing up on screen. But what you'll see then is once you've created that Kubernetes extension in the portal, you have this extension created. We can see it's pending. You need to wait for that thing to create. And what that's doing in behind the scenes on the cluster is creating a load of pods, containers, effectively, but then go ahead and run that stamp. So not our apps, but the things that actually enable that app. So think about like when you use app services in Azure, and the product group have a load of stuff running in the background that makes all of that stuff work. That's what you're installing when you install this extension. So we create the custom location. We now go ahead then and create the Kubernetes environment for app service. And then we can start deploying apps. So again, it sounds like a lot. It sounds a lot scarier because I'm kind of introducing a few concepts here. But the power behind this is really interesting because now I could have a Kubernetes cluster again running AWS, GCP. There we go, good. Or Azure, of course, we missed that one. We could have it in Azure as well. But you could go ahead and start deploying app services onto any of those environments. So I'm just going to skip a bit ahead here on the recording. Here we go. There we go. So this is now the creation experience for an app service. This is the normal creation experience that you would expect. I'm going ahead, creating a brand new resource group. I'm giving it a name, and you can see that chrisapp.azurewebsites.net is taken. I missed out there. But hold on, I don't want to deploy it into Azure. I want to deploy it into my own Kubernetes cluster. So what I've done, just really subtly, just to stop there a moment, is in my region drop-down there, you can see the custom location that I created a few moments earlier. So no longer am I sending that to an Azure region to be created. I'm sending it to that Kubernetes cluster to be created. Then you've got to go and select a runtime stack, just like you would with any of your app services. And this is where you need to be a little bit careful, because preview, certain versions, certain frameworks, certain things are supported. As you can see here, when I change to Windows, for example, Windows is not supported right now, it's Linux. So those are just some of the nuances to be aware of if you decide to try a previewer. We're going to go and create a web app. That's interesting because I think that now works on the cluster that I tried running it on today. So we might do a bit of a live demo if we have time, maybe. But you can see what this is doing. Normal creation experience of a resource, just like in Azure. But here, I just pause that. That is the listing of all the containers running on that Kubernetes cluster. Yes, it does happen to be an AKS cluster, just because I happen to be working with that. But it could be any of those other Kubernetes clusters that we could just be watching what is getting created. And look at that. We've got the Azure Arc infrastructure, the stuff that enables Azure Arc to work. We've got the core Kubernetes infrastructure. And then we've got a few resources that enable app service to work on the cluster. And at the very bottom, we've got the app. The app is now being created. I haven't run anything on the command line to do that. It's just the fact that Azure has sent that request to the Kubernetes cluster to go and process, to spin up that app service. And you can see that resource is now created. It looks exactly like any other Azure resource. It does not look any different. If we go and click on the link, that just looks like any default app service web app. So the experience to go and create that, for me as a developer, is no different to creating app services and functions and whatnot than I would be creating for Azure resources. And that is the beauty of this, because from a development perspective, I want to focus on the application. I want to make the best application that I can make. I don't want to have to worry about Kubernetes and containers and new packaging formats and all these things. I just want to carry on writing the apps that I like writing in app service. But now this enables me to deploy them to places like Google Cloud or AWS or on-premises using that same format without having to change anything. Like, check this out right here. So what we're doing here is this is the easy auth experience that is built into app service. So rather than me writing my own authentication authorization, app service has a nice little helper where you can go ahead and kind of sideload it so that then you make sure only authorized users log into your site. Works exactly the same way in app service running on a Kubernetes cluster. You can see there, it's checking that I'm actually authorized and I'm allowed to log in. I go and accept, off we go, awesome. Now, not all of those features of app services are supported yet. Again, it is all in preview right now. So there are some differences, like I think custom domains right now don't work, for example, amongst some other things. But you can see the kind of direction that Microsoft is going in here with this and the power behind it. Like, all of this infrastructure is just running on that Kubernetes cluster. That's the same kind of stamp that you would get running an app service environment or something like that. So if you think about what that means operating these types of services, well, instead, now you can go and host them in regions that you want, on clouds that you want, in data centers that you want, by using something like Azure Arc for application services. Scaling, super easy, works exactly the same as it would for app service. It's literally just a slider. So you go ahead, run the slider, and you can see there we're watching them all spin up in real time. Just like you would see them spin up in real time in Azure. It's just it happens to be creating containers on your Kubernetes cluster instead. Just conscious how we're doing on time. I think we're good, right? Time-wise? Cool. So, you know, the idea with app service is there. Now, with Azure Functions run on app services. So, guess what? We can run Azure Functions in those Kubernetes clusters as well. So again, you've got the same kind of limitations that you need to be careful of which runtime you're picking, whether you're using a container-based Azure function as well, and then picking the region as your Kubernetes cluster rather than an Azure region. But again, what you will then notice is when you go ahead and actually create that, all of those add-ons, all of those extensions, all of those features from an Azure function perspective will work very similarly to how you saw them run natively with Azure Functions natively running on Azure. The only difference here is I think that monitoring does work with Azure Functions. It didn't work with App Service when I last tried, but I think that might now have actually changed as well. But what you'll see once again is creation experience, exactly the same. When you go ahead and create that resource, create it through the Azure portal, you go and see the exact same thing in the back end, in Kubernetes, containers getting created as a result. And I've got a bit at the end which also talks about logic apps doing the exact same thing, but I think we all get the idea with that as well. It's all the same process. API management and Event Grid works slightly differently. Event Grid, I forget exactly how it works, but it doesn't quite look like it creates the containers. It does something slightly different behind the scenes. But API Management Gateway runs very similarly to this. Rather than hosting an instance like in a VM, or well, you can't really host it in a VM, I suppose. But if anyone's hosted an API Management Gateway, I know one person has at least, in containers already, it's the exact same experience, apart from you can now go and manage that using an Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes cluster. One thing I just want to show in a moment, just for anyone who's interested and maybe dived a little bit more into the Kubernetes side previously, because I think I included that here as well. If we could skip on a bit. There we go. I'll just go back. There we go. Is because of the fact this is a Kubernetes cluster running, a Kubernetes cluster you have access to, you can go and see everything that's going on behind the scenes as well. So you can go ahead, describe the pods that are running on that Kubernetes cluster, as we're going to do right now, and you can go and see what's actually going on with that cluster. So what images are getting pulled down, what configuration is getting injected into that Azure function, all of that kind of stuff. If you're more on the operator side and the infrastructure side and you care about some of that, you can go and take a look at that. Of course, mileage may vary, and you take a look at the docs in terms of what you should and shouldn't do, but it's there. It's just a container running like any other container running on your Kubernetes cluster. And that's the magic behind all of this. And you're going to raise something when I pause. I just thought of that. Hello. Sure. Taints, yes. Node. Taints, yes, exactly. Node affinity is a good question because you'd have to control that in the deployments, and I don't think you have that level of control or granularity yet to be able to do that. But if whoever it is wants to mess me afterwards, I can take that away, take a look. But I don't think the second one you'd quite have the control there yet for that. Any more? Perfect. Oh, good. Any more in the room while we're paused for a moment? Cool. We're very nearly done. So I don't think there was anything else in particular apart from showing, again, a logic app doing the same thing, but we've got the point. It's a container running on our Kubernetes cluster, scheduled through Azure, same control plane, same management plane. I, as a developer, don't have to change what I do. It's still a logic app. It's still an app service. It's still an app function. I'm still deploying to that in the exact same way that I would deploy to any of my other Azure services as well. So the power behind this is really impressive when you start thinking about what it can go and achieve there. So as a recap, Azure Arc, the idea behind it, single control plane, single management plane, started off focusing on virtual machines and being able to do things like inventory management, update management, monitoring, etc. Then they focused on databases, but also Kubernetes. But now starting to look at these application services, being able to run those application services on AWS, GCP, on-premises, and Azure. There we go. We're all going to be chanting it in our sleep by the end. So, final thing, how to learn more. Clicker decides to not work. Awesome. There we go. Number one, shameless self-plug, but has to be done. cloudwithchris.com. I've written a series all about this. Literally, I think the weekend when this came out, I blogged all different 6 of these posts, going bit by bit about how all this works, step by step how you go and create that. So if you want to try any of these out, take a look. I've got all of that on there. And there was, I think, another slide which has disappeared, but another plug for Microsoft Learn. I always plug it when I talk because it is awesome. It's growing by the day. There's so much awesome content on there. There is some on Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, not the app side yet. But it goes from Power Apps to Python to how do I learn Azure to what is cloud to you name it, you think it's probably there somewhere. So definitely go and check out Microsoft Learn as well. With that, I think we have some time for some questions, if anyone has any. I've not blown everyone's minds too much. How'd you pay for it? It's a good question. I don't think the pricing model is out yet because it's still in preview. And I think that's the question on everyone's minds because it's not going to be something that you go, right, you want to run on GCP? Go for it. There's going to be some kind of cost running with that, right? So with Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes, I think there is some kind of cost to run that. Whether they then have a cost for extensions or something on the top, I'm not sure. But again, that's a common question at the moment. I'm not sure whether they've decided or whether they've not communicated yet, but expect by GA that will, of course, be there, but no details yet, I'm afraid. But very good question. No, very good question. They are not running on the cluster. That's one of the challenges at the minute. Is they will still be relying. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, good point. Thank you for calling me out. The first question was about pricing, whether there's a pricing model currently in place for Azure Arc for apps, and the answer is no. For Azure Arc, there is, but for the Azure Arc for apps piece, there is not yet. The second question was about if you're creating resources like Azure Functions or app services, you might depend on resources like storage accounts or application insights. Where do they get created? And the answer to that is still in Azure. At the moment, there is no way to get those resources running on Kubernetes clusters. Whether they go in that direction, given what we're seeing here, interesting, don't know. But when you think about, again, some of the other evolutions with dependencies like Azure, for example, with the storage accounts, again, whether they start looking at their dependencies there, don't know. But right now, still storage accounts, still application insights running on Azure, I'm afraid. And this is whole part of this hybrid multi-cloud strategy. playing friendly. It might be using Azure Stack or something else. This all works really nicely and well together. Yeah. Yeah, please.
You talked. Sorry. You talked about deploying apps and how it takes away from the developer to need to think about the infrastructure it's on. But there is an extension to that with the local development as well, where you can actually enroll your machine that you're developing with. And as you're with Azure Arc, you can leverage the managed identity side of things as well. So your managed identity can run from your local machine into your Key Vault or into your SQL server, and you're not worrying about your RBAC permissions on your own identity. Yep.
An excellent point. A star. Hopefully everyone caught that online. Yes, good. Perfect. There we go. That's the first time I've ever had to run over and take a mic with me in a talk. Any more online? Conscious I want to give some space for the folks online as well. What AD pod identity work for this? At the moment, I don't think so, because I think they actually call that out on the app services page, the Azure Arc for apps, I should say, page. That things like pod identity don't work yet, and the managed identities overall. Again, I think the thing you're seeing with all of this is this kind of overarching open source journey start coming together, so I wouldn't be surprised. But at the moment, there's no integration there that I'm aware of. But again, good question. If you want to follow up, if there's anything specific there, shout and I can take that away. Cool. Unless there's anything else, I think that's me.
Thanks, Chris. Okie doke. So I guess for everybody in the room, refreshment break now, 5 minutes whilst Kirk gets set up. And for those of you online, do what you need to do. So not to gloat, but yeah, we do have beers, pizza, and Pepsi over here. So yeah, give us 5 minutes. We'll just get Kirk set up now, and we shall be right back with you. Any questions in the meantime, please do pop them in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Hi everyone, are we all still there? Yeah, in the room, we're here. Online, everybody happy? Everybody back from their comfort break? We're nearly with you. Virtual world will be with you very soon.
And you can hear me. Yeah, it's not live yet. I've unmuted, so fingers crossed you can start to hear me, yeah? A bit quiet, I'll do the same thing. Turn it up. There you go, so you should start to hear me, and it probably balance out a bit, because I think Teams has some sort of auto-balance thing. So. I'm gonna, oh yeah, of course, yeah. Wow. I'm in the Matrix. I'm seeing me, seeing me, seeing me. Okay. No. Yes, I will. I'm just going to figure out how. Why. Come on, PowerPoint. All right. Good to go? All good? Okay. Well, you guys can hear me. Hopefully everyone else can hear me. So I am really happy to be here in person doing the stuff I love doing. This is my favorite bit that I've ever done. I would say of the job, but I actually don't get paid to do this. This is the bit I just love doing anyway. But yeah, I'm here today. My name's Kirk Ryan. I'm Azure MVP. I'm an AWS community builder as well, but ignore that. And I just love tech. I can't believe you get paid to just mess around with tech, basically, and build really cool things. And I'll share some of the things I've built that have nothing to do with the day job at all. But today, I'm going to focus on Terraform. When I first made this session, Bicep was like, I think, alpha or something like that, and now it's obviously been released. But yeah, Terraform is basically, if you don't know what it is, it's a great way of orchestrating and deploying architecture out there and just keeping it in a continuous sort of state. So again, as I said here, versioning infrastructure is pretty good. Some people call it infrastructure as code, and you'll hear it lots of different things as well. If you want to connect, I love having chats on LinkedIn. I mentor as well, so if you ever want to do anything, if you've never presented before, give me a shout. I'll give you hints and tips. Not that I'm the best or any good at it, but I share what I know. I'm a principal technologist at NetApp, but I'm also a founder of my own company as well, and I'll share some of the stuff we do there. But I basically spent the last sort of 5 years architecting, designing solutions. So if I was working for Microsoft, I'd be a CSA. If I'm working for AWS, I'd be a CSE or something. And if I'm working for Google, I'd be an engineer of some sort, because everything's engineering over there. Same job. I do have a blog, so you can find it at kirkryan.co.uk, Kirk in the .cloud, and all the other 72 domain names that I seem to have bought and just point at the same site. So any of those. Okay. So what will you learn in the next 45-ish minutes? Basically, we're going to focus on three main things. One is anyone using Terraform? Okay, two. Is anyone using infrastructure as code? Okay, more hands. So who's using Bicep? Cool. So basically a sort of quick 101, how to get started. Obviously, everyone's going to start everywhere, and by the end of this session, you'll be able to get started and deploy your first resource in Azure. Really simple. Then, following on from that, eventually, come on. Maybe it's a Mac thing. Whenever I go in a Microsoft building, my Apple stuff starts malfunctioning. Okay, so we'll do a simple deployment as well. We're going to deploy straight into Azure. We're going to do what's called a simple deployment, which is simple and free. You won't be charged to do anything. All the code, you can scan the QR code. I've got GitHub repos, and you can just deploy that quickly. And it's a really good way of just getting a grasp of, a very simple deployment of Azure. I'm going to have to keep clicking. Oh my God. And then what we'll do is a more complex deployment as well. So basically, we're going to deploy a multiplayer game of Snake, and it turns into absolute chaos when you have about 16 odd people in there. So it's going to be brilliant. So, like anything, any story, we've got to start at the beginning and take our first steps, right? Come on, start working again. Please. Okay. Oh, what? Okay. So, if you want to get started, you can download and install it. It's available for either Mac or Linux, or of course, Windows as well. Yep. Oh my God, what's happening? Why are you testing me? Come on, let's go back. Okay. All right, here we go. So the simple deployment here, basically what you need, if you're doing Terraform for the first time, you need to make sure that you've got the Azure CLI installed. It will always call that. You have to make sure you're logged in, you're using the right subscription, you've done your AZ login, all that sort of stuff. And GitHub, if you want to follow along, you can scan the QR code and that will load the repo up for you as well. Pretty cool. Why did I do so many animations? I'm really regretting this now. And then one little snag I found on Windows when I was doing this is you just have to make sure you run it as admin because it has a silent failure for some reason, and I have no idea why. Okay, so the first step really is to set up the provider. In Terraform, basically you have this concept of providers. There can be a provider from Azure. There can be a provider from AWS, GCP, the unnamed cloud of IBM, if that still exists. I don't even know what it's called anymore. But other cloud providers, and obviously there's people like my employer NetApp have a provider in there as well, which does all your on-prem storage stuff as well. So once you've got those, and you'll see that here, this is obviously code, and you can see here's the providers. I'm telling it my required provider is the Azure provider there. It's version 2.26, which I found out today is actually now 2.78 or something. I have to update because it didn't have support for ARM, but now it does, which is cool. And it's as easy as that. So these files are really easy to understand. You tell Terraform, what are you going to be interacting with? So maybe you've got Azure, maybe you've got other architecture. You load in that provider. And that's going to allow Terraform to understand the definition or config files that you're going to create. You can lock the versions as well, so always a best practice to try and lock it to what you know works, and then just set a task to revisit it every now and then, because obviously, great thing about tech is it all works at the time you create it. So you know it's going to carry on working from that point, but you will need to refresh your providers, like I did about 10 minutes before my presentation when I went to do a test deploy, and I realized that that version of the Azure RM provider does not support ARM, and obviously all Apple MacBooks now are ARM. So luckily, the team at Azure have been fantastic, and they do have that support. So all I had to do was change one number, and voila, everything works. Brilliant. Kissy. Let's have a look. Yeah, it should be, because it's the same as the other one. Maybe I'll swap mics and do the other one, just in case. Because was it okay for Chris's? Maybe I mean, let's see. Is that? I can just hold this and do this. Is that better? Okay, I'll just treat it like a normal mic. Okay, cool. I wish my clicker would work. Right, once you've got your provider working, basically there's a deployment step called init. So you just do init and apply. So once you do a Terraform init, what it does is it looks at the provider, it goes and queries it, and it says, okay, these are the things I need to download into the folder to go and grab it all. So that initiates that project, and you'll see that here, where I'm in the folder, I've got my configuration file in here, and once I run that, you can see it's going to go and find the actual plugins, looks for the version match, goes and grabs it all, makes sure that it's all secure, and brings it all down. If you do the apply, so what this does is it takes your plan. You can see it gives you the exact sort of thing of what's going to happen. So here, for this simple deployment, what I've done is I'm just deploying a resource group in Azure. It's free, it's easy, and it illustrates the process of specifying a resource, defining it, and then deploying it. So you can do this and incur no cost at all. So really easy to just get started. Okay, and with that in mind, when you do that, then you'll see that if I go and look at a resource in Azure, it will be there, just a resource group called that. Okay. And then once we did the check as well, so if we go into the portal, we'll actually see it. I do have this stuff live, but I always like a video just in case Wi-Fi breaks. You'll see here I had my resource group. It's there. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it works. And that's fantastic. And one of the things I like about Terraform is in my role, I have to use multiple clouds. So for me, the tool of Terraform is very useful, and for my startup, it's very useful because it allows me to learn one set of rules that I can go and use for GCP and stuff. Now, that doesn't mean deploying compute is the same. You still have to learn how to deploy compute. It's a different resource provider, and so the syntax might be different. But what I like is the rules are the same. So how I define something, where I go to get that single source of knowledge, it's fantastic. Now, obviously, if you're using Azure, then you can use Bicep, and it's absolutely brilliant because I used to hate ARM with a vengeance. I'd look at it and I could never understand ARM. It was just not the easiest thing to understand for a normal human being. But Microsoft really, with Bicep, took a step in this direction. It's just made things a lot easier for people like me anyway. So kudos to them because it's an awesome technology as well. And then the other thing I like, especially when I do lots of demos, and I'm sure most of the CSAs in the room will end up with about 70 resources still running by the end of the week and have a panic on a Friday night when they realize, oh my God, I'm burning through all my subscription credits, is that I can destroy entire labs with one command, which is Terraform destroy. And the great thing here is the output shows you exactly what the result is of the commands that you're going to run. So if I run in the same folder, Terraform destroy, it will show me that plan output. Now, I did something really smart with this sort of stuff. I tied it into GitHub Actions, and I got it to auto-generate PRs, and it would auto-populate the PRs with all of this information so that when I came to review them, I could see exactly, right, you are requesting this is the impact it would have on my infrastructure, approved, or I need to talk to you because it's going to take a DNS offline you perhaps didn't know. So it's always DNS at the end of the day, isn't it, that breaks absolutely everything, so you don't want to delete these. And you can see here, it's telling me, look, this is going to be destroyed. One thing to destroy, there it is, there's its location, it's in North Europe, that's its name. If I had any tags, and if I was doing this in the real world, of course I'd have tags, but because I'm doing it on my own stuff, it's just a total mess, so I don't have any. And then, yeah, I've just put yes. So it doesn't take things like Y or enter, or you can't trick it. You have to type yes. And then it will destroy it. And basically, it's under the covers, but it's using that resource provider to go and actually talk to Azure natively. So it's doing all the heavy lift for you. It understands the interdependencies as well. So, okay, a resource group doesn't have any dependencies other than a subscription. I think it's subscription, resource group, and then you build your stuff onto that, right? But if I was to do the more complex point, which I'm going to do in a minute, you start to get a lot of dependencies, implicit and explicit as well. There are things that Azure can understand, and there are things that Azure can't understand in terms of it will know that, for example, a virtual machine is dependent on a NIC being present, which is weird because when you do it in the UI, you never think about that. You have to create the NIC first and then attach the VM to it, and the same with the storage and things like that. It's all hidden in the magic of next, and you're done. But with Terraform, you kind of quickly learn, oh, hang on, this is how things are dependent on one another, and it's pretty eye-opening, to be honest. So very quickly, you have now seen the simple deployment, and we're going to move into a more complex deployment now as well. So now you know enough to be dangerous, okay? And it's not hard, and I will give a huge shout out to whoever is doing the documentation at HashiCorp, because their documentation is up there with the best. It can take you from literally you've never touched the thing before to really being dangerous with it in just like a day of playing around with it and stuff. It's awesome. I put it up there for any developers. You'll know like probably the highest documentation you see is something like Twilio. Their documentation is unbelievable, even for like I'm like a semi-developer sort of thing. I can do MVPs and stuff, but this is great to get started. So we're going to do more complex deployment and end up with multiplayer chaos at the end of it. So let's just go back and explain what this is. We're going to do a multiplayer game. It's going to be an Azure App Service, which is basically a Docker container, and Azure App Service plan as well. So it also educated me how Azure builds stuff. So I didn't really know that until I went and deployed it. So in terms of dependencies, one thing to really bear in mind is Terraform has these implicit and explicit dependencies as well. Implicit means it can work out that, for example, this might be dependent on this existence. So correct me if I'm wrong, an app service is dependent on a service plan existing, right? So I didn't have to tell it that. It knows. Pretty cool. So that's great. That means my life becomes a lot easier. And that works the same way for provisioning as destroying as well. So it knows, oh, I can't destroy a service plan whilst it has an app service. So I need to destroy that, and it keeps going. But you may have things like, if you look at a huge deployment, for example, you may have DNS controllers, you may have different elements that you think, okay, if this is just a test environment, and to give you a great example, at NetApp, we used to have a live demo lab for all our Azure NetApp files services. So, and this thing, it took me about 3 days to build it for the whole of EMEA, so that every CSA could go and deploy the fastest SAP in the cloud, bar none. Right, Azure leading the way. Couldn't get faster SAP than that because of the NFS that we built with them. And we were like, okay, this is pretty cool, until the bill came and we're like, right, okay, for a demo lab, you would probably need to try and control this a little bit. So we did things like, okay, can we switch things off? Can we switch things on and stuff? But then you've still got infrastructure there taken away and gently, like putting a little knock in the bill. And then I went and learned Terraform. There was no part of my role that told me to go and learn Terraform. I'm curious and thought, I want to give this a go. I've heard a lot of stuff about it, heard about infrastructure as code. I've even presented about infrastructure as code, but I've never done it. A lot of CSAs will probably find that as well. You talk about a lot of stuff, but you probably necessarily haven't run it in production, haven't really got into the depths of it and found out all the horrible stuff that's not on the PowerPoint. And basically, I wanted to go and do that. So by the end of that project, basically what happened was I took what was 720 hours of running or something like that, and it turned into 18 hours a month. And basically, I even took it down to the point where we could destroy everything, like actually bill zero, no DNS servers, no networks, nothing. It was all gone. And for what took 3 days to set up, I could deploy in 2.5 minutes with one button press. And that was the entire SAP HANA demo system, including DNS and everything else that we had in there as well. And then I could do things afterwards, which were pretty cool, because nothing stays the same. As an architect, your architecture is only as good as the day you deploy it, because you've probably got some information. Maybe it's high quality, maybe it's not. Some of it's guesswork, but it's an educated guess at the end of the day. And you go, this is, based on your requirements, this is what I think is the right system for you, given what we've seen and stuff, but things change like that. The best thing about this was being able to turn around and say, even if your best person leaves, your whole infrastructure is documented. And if you need to change anything from virtual machine size to the next one up, it's one line of code, and that's it. You don't have to go in there and change it or anything. It's just there in the code. Your new hires can very quickly see what infrastructure you've got. And it was just, I started to really see, okay, I see the power of this now, because I had been fighting for a long time. I came from first line, second line, third line support. I did VMware, I did all the other bits and pieces, and then I got into an architecture role probably about 7 years ago. And I'd never thought I'd be messing around with code or developing or anything. Fast forward like a few years, now I can do Terraform, Node apps, React Native. The world's changed. It's like so hard to not be involved in code anymore. And it's great, because this used to be remembering a series of clicks and shortcuts, and you might have your own sort of batch files and stuff like that. But this is just great, because it means I can get on with the value creation. If you want to get the code for the main deployment, you can grab it there. And the task here, let's just go through this. I want everyone in the room to look at what's on the screen, everyone online to look at what's on the screen, and just run through these sections, because let's have a look what we've got defined in the complex deployment. If I remember this right. The first thing we can see, well, we tell Terraform what provider do we want to use, and we can see that. The provider I want is Azure, and it's this version at this time. Okay. I'm going to then configure it, so any other additional sort of things I need to pass, and they're documented, it's got a few flags, I can put them in there. So I think that's where you can go to specific like gov regions and things like that. You can put those in and other bits and pieces, like different authentication methods than normal AZ login. Then I create my resource group, so you can see I'm creating it here. This name, it's in North Europe, and I've got an environment called demo. And then here's the app service plan. So I've told it, and these are the dependencies. I haven't had to tell it every single thing I'm telling it where to go. I said wherever I deployed my my Azure resource group multiplayer snake, so the actual resource group itself, that's where I want this to deploy, which is great because that means I can change that on the fly. So if I'm responding to, for example, I have a huge IoT hub that's looking after a load of bikes for a courier that you've probably ordered food from before. Basically, if they say we need this in the US, it will take me 3 minutes to fire up the whole environment in the US. If they say we're now going live in Oz, I can go and fire it up in Oz just by changing that one line. And I can deploy that environment, exact replica image of what I have around the world. So it's really powerful from that perspective. Other bits and pieces there, and then you can see I'm going for a B1 basic just because I'm tight. So, and then for the Snake app as well, what you can see here again, now we're looking at the app service within the plan. Well, that's also got to go in the same location as the parent resource group. That's the name, that's the plan ID. So that's grabbing that not from the resource group, it's grabbing it from the service plan. So what Terraform's now doing is going, okay, so that depends on that depends on that, so I now know automatically what I should deploy, at what stage to deploy it as well. I did some configuration as well. I've got it to deploy some stuff that I've got, so npm start and everything else as well, just to get my game up and running. Thanks, John. And then we're going to do an apply. So the apply, again, gives you the plan output, so you can see exactly what's going to happen. You know, at no point is it ever going to surprise you, really, because it's telling you the plus symbol is something new. There's a tilde sign, which means it's going to modify it in place, and there's a minus sign that means it's going to remove it. That's really how simple it is. And it tells you there as well, I'm going to add 3 things. So it's going to run through. You can see what's happening here. It's complete once the subscription has done all it needs to do. And at this point, it's deploying now all those interdependencies and my app. Is it app plan? Yeah. Any questions while it's doing this? So. Yeah, there's a headless mode as well. So if you're putting it on something like in CI/CD, where it's not interactive, you can do that as well. Like go through it. Yeah. You find you always go through some default flags first, don't you? So, and basically, by the end of this, what it's done is it's deployed Snow. Now, at the Northern Azure user group, obviously I can't see any laptops out, but we had it. It seems like since I've learned no one burns a laptop, so this isn't into a touchscreen for some reason, so it's going to be really naff for everyone in here. Your snake is just going to die. But basically, if you imagine about 30 odd people all going absolutely nuts, and then I've lost the room for 10 minutes because they're all competing with each other. It was a great idea at the time, but yeah, better as a video. And then, what I do want to do is just give some credit to Simon Dieppe, who wrote the multiplayer game. It's open source, really cool. You can grab that off GitHub as well. Just to loop back, like every story, we start at the beginning. What did I promise you? I promised you that I'd show you how to get started. I'd show you a simple deployment, and then I'd show you a more complex one with some dependencies. So, okay. I'd also show you how pointers and clickers and stuff on Mac doesn't seem to work in any. Yeah, great. So you know what? It's great to see people in real life again. Honestly, it's awesome. But if you'd love to connect, I do blog about stuff. My topics on my blogs will probably be changing over the next sort of few months. But yeah, basically, I blog about all cloud technology. Ironically, I've found that sometimes I will do a Bing search, and basically, I'll go, how do I do this? And I find twice this happened to me in the last month. A blog I wrote 3 years ago of how to do this. I'm like, perfect, it's me. So it works really well, and I encourage everyone to do it because, yeah, sharing that knowledge is really the strength of the community. It's awesome. It's great to be back in person and see this again and just have those chats over a pizza and beer that are absolutely priceless. So that's everything around the Terraform piece. I hope you found it useful. You know where to find me if you've got any questions, or you can shout them out. But if you've got anything that you think, I want to take it offline, then feel free to reach out. I'm really responsive on Twitter and LinkedIn. Yeah, thanks very much.
Yep, thanks a lot, Kirk. Awesome stuff. Are we going to call our Quizmaster Matt up now then? So, yeah. No, I think the window's open there. So, yeah, everybody in the room and on Teams, if you're still there, we'll crack straight on with our quiz, I think. So what have we got? 2 £25 Amazon vouchers? We're doing first and second prize, Matt? Prize.
When he said it's fine, the window is open, I literally thought meant a window is open so you can go in.
Yeah.
Do something. I was like, why does the window open have anything to do with it? My brain is not
Not right there.
Yeah. It's just me up there at the moment.
Yeah, it wasn't just you with the clicker, Kirk. Like, mine
No.
was doing it too.
Mine was working fine on the desk. The minute I got
Yeah.
it, it just went,
No,
nah.
same.
Right. Microphone for Matt.
Unless there's interference. Is the one on your, the one on the desk?
I think you might have to use a lavalier.
Labs.
Yeah.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Just getting the mic sorted for Matthew. See, these are things that you just
Don't have to worry about when you're in your studio at home. I know.
got everything to hand. See, everybody's joining up anyway.
Right. Everyone hear me all right?
Yeah,
Yep.
I can hear you. Yeah, that is a fair point, actually. So if everybody can refrain from answering for 2 seconds in the room. Well, how's about this then? Maybe we do one. No, we can't do a winner from the room and a winner. Yeah, can we?
Depends on the.
A winner from. It does, doesn't it? But maybe whoever's the top in the room and whoever's the top online. Maybe that's a fair way.
Right. So slightly different this time for those that have seen my quizzes before. There are some that are the usual multi-choice. There are some where you've got to type an answer in, and all become apparent when I start up. Yep. Yeah. God, good turnout. So you're going to get a series of questions that come up. I will read out the question, maybe, if I've got time. And then it'll either be pick one of the coloured icons or coloured shapes or whatever they are, or type the answer. Again, I apologise. It's really weird being in front of people because if you don't like it, I've got nowhere to hide. Oh, thanks. Okay, so about ready? Everyone in? Everyone in the room in? Everyone online in? Then let us begin. It is probably. You've seen my quizzes before. So let's start with, I think, an easy one. When's the Windows 11 launch date? Coming up soon. Is it April the 1st, November the 11th, October the 5th, or December the 1st, 2021? Yeah, good percentage of people right there. It's October the 5th, so it's next week. Pick the next one. And we've got Ross and Dean and TC, top 3. Okay then, you ready for this one? Easy one to start with. Come on, click. Well, nothing's happening at the moment. Something's crashed. Oh, here we go. Type the answer. Name the Azure product. There are general groans from the audience here. There's about another 6 of these, so. And they get progressively worse. Cloud Shell. Wow. There are some when I've given you a bit of leeway on spellings and things, but you have to be a bit precise on these. Really?
What's that done to the leaderboard? Oh, all right. When will Microsoft US workers be returning to the office? This was an announcement from a couple of weeks ago. You're right. The majority of you got that one. We haven't actually given a date for people yet. Changes now. Phil B moving up. Oh, we've got some reshuffling going on. Joe in the lead. Type the answer. Name the Azure product. General level of confusion. Way too much fun putting these together. Oh, some people have got it. There you go. I gave you both options. Cognitive services. Told you they get more evil as you go along. Yeah, I can see. He's not winning this time as well. Question 5. What's the name of the tutoring platform Microsoft bought this month? Take lessons, learn stuff. Pluralsight or Quora. See, tough ones this time. Oh, not many people got that. What was a platform called Take Lessons? TC takes the lead with Chris coming up in third. I think it's another one. Name the Microsoft product. Which one? Top left or bottom? Well, it's some sort of transmission in the car. Oh, there we go. We got some good answers there. Power Automate. What have we changed here? TC still in the lead. Okay, moving on to the next one. Another question, regular question. What does TPM stand for? Important part of Windows 11 launch. To pay more. Trusted platform module. ThinkPad messaging. 10 powered monkeys. Well done. Trusted platform module, which may or may not be a requirement for Windows 11. I think it's everyone's favorite round coming up again. Type the answer, name the Azure product. In my best Roy Walker impression, say what you see. These will get reused in some of our internal. Anyone in the room? Data lake. For those that can't hear that, that's Mark Zuckerberg's storage was the answer we're given there. Joe takes the lead. Another regular quiz question. Which of the following will not run on Azure Arc? Logic Apps, Event Grid, Event Hub, or Functions? Did. Event Hub. Well done. 10 of you that got that one right. You know what's coming up now. It's not loading. That's what's coming up now. Lag. That's what's coming up at the moment. Where's that button not pressing? There we go. User error. Joe, Chris, TC, top 3 at the moment with Microsoft Mike. Surging for lead. Right. Name the Azure product. Come on, everyone. You know you're loving these now. I think I've been fairly generous on this one as to which options are allowed. Last few seconds. 14 answers are in. No, wow, we've got some incredible answers on there. Willy Winks on Azure. Red Hat OpenShift. Chris in the lead. What language is Terraform written in? Is it C#? Is it Go? Is it Python? Is it COBOL? I took a punt on what you might be covering. It's Go. No, it's not. Right then. Last question of the night, and it's another goodie. This is another name the Microsoft product. Does it work? I'm quite proud of this one. Oh, there's some blank faces in this room now.
Yeah, okay.
I'm quite proud of this because it's quite evil. Xbox Series X. Xbox Series X. Come on. In third place, TC. In second place, Joe. And our leader for tonight is Chris. Well done, mate.
Go to number 2 and 3.
You're deferring, so
Yep.
Joe and TC.
They're both online. That's Oh no, Joe's there. Yeah. I'm so used to seeing people through a TV screen now. It doesn't really matter anymore. Everybody's. So Joe, yeah, and Toby, that's you. TC, I think online. Is it you, Toby?
Oh, yeah.
I wait for the screen to reply. Yeah. Cool. Well, yeah. Yeah. Or you can run through. You can run through the closing bit if you want. All right. I'll just go through my phone. We're probably echoing like hell now because is it all right?
Yeah. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, Matt. Right. Right. Okay. Let me find my slide. God, there's nothing like pressure with lots of people staring at you, is there? Right, okie dokie then. So there we go. We've come to the end. We're not waiting another 5 minutes. We're going to skip on. So, yeah, no, okay. Thank you both, Chris, Kirk. Superb. I hope everybody will agree. Let's give the guys a round of applause again for such a... And of course, Matt, for an awesome quiz as always. I think you found a new calling in life there, Matt. I think. Well, exactly. You know, we can get more cameras on the scene. Get Mr. Chips on the screen with Roy Walker. Say what you see. Okay, so yeah, that is it for now. Obviously, people online, we're going to be saying goodbye to you. Hope you've enjoyed this format. I mean, it's been quite a learning curve. I just want to quickly give a big shout out to Dean, who's kind of been behind the scenes, kind of keeping tabs on everything. Thank you, Dean. So yeah, feedback is welcome from the virtual world as well as in public. Don't really know how we're going to move forward with these, other than we're going to go back to virtual now for the next couple of months. I think the idea was, when we originally talked about these meetups, that we do one in-person / hybrid event every 3 months. So it would mean that our next hybrid event is just before Christmas. So watch this space. I think we're going to try and do something a little bit festive, a bit more fun, inclusive. We'll see how we go with that. But for now, we're going to move back to the virtual world as from next month. So back, save the date, 20th of October. We've got John joining us to talk about breaking up monolithic websites using Azure, and Derek is going to join us to talk about Azure Virtual WAN. So save the date, go on RSVP, and it leaves me, like I say, we can all stick around now. Obviously, when I say goodbye, you're all still going to be here, aren't you? So we'll, for those online, we've got a lot of pizza and beer. Goodbye. So do I say goodbye and just sit here? I don't know. What do you do now? I'm not sure. Put a background filter on us. I don't know. But yeah, no, there we go. Thanks everybody for attending. If you can scan that QR code, I just realised I'm kind of talking not to my phone. Feedback absolutely is welcome. Anything you'd like to see changed, added, these are a community user group at the end of the day. We're looking to spread the word of the Welsh Azure user group. Now we've got this space down in Cardiff. Hopefully we can make it a regular occurrence. And, obviously as the nights get lighter, when we're back out in, through the winter, into the summer, then we can make a little bit more of an event of it maybe. So yeah, lots in the pipeline. Thanks everybody for attending. We're going to say goodbye to everybody online, and everybody in the room, we're going to finish off the beer and pizza. We've got a little bit of time to say hello again to everyone. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. I don't think I missed anybody. Did I miss anything? Don't think so. Yeah, cool.
Thank you, John.
Bye. Right. Bye, everyone. See you all soon. I haven't got the cheesy retro music to play out now, look. What do I do?
Sing.
Chris, show tunes now. Right, we're off now. Thanks, everybody, for joining. It's been a pleasure. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave the feedback. Obviously, Toby, I'll be in touch with your voucher. You're sat over there. No, Toby's on here. This is getting really confused. Joe, you're sat over there. I'm going. This is just going downhill rapidly. Right. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.